Hello, everyone, and welcome to episode 3 of the One More Film Blog podcast. This is our episode for August 2026, and our topic is Cookie Queens, the new documentary by Alyssa Namias. Uh, my, I'm your host, Ken Morefield, owner-operator of One More Film Blog, and I have never sold Girl Scout cookies, although I did win the Pinewood Derby once when I was a Weeblo or a Cub Scout. My guest host on this episode is Prisca Bird. Prisca, can you introduce yourself and have you ever sold Girl Scout cookies?
I have not sold Girl Scout cookies, but I did sell coupon booklets through my school, if that counts at all. And did a little garage sale side hustle with my parents sometimes, haggling with people. So this documentary is very interesting to me. I'm a teacher in the Pacific Northwest, the Seattle area, and I'm involved with the arts and faith film community and do some writing and discussions with them. So really thrilled to be back to talk about Cookie Queens.
All right, great. So one of the reasons I wanted to talk about this film is because I saw it at the Full Frame Documentary Film Festival in March. At the time, it had 100% at Rotten Tomatoes, and I was a little bit more mixed. I checked before our recording, and it was still 91% at Rotten Tomatoes, um, which was higher than I expected. But I was also a little surprised that it was like 59% for the popcorn meter, which was the general audience. So I'm used to sometimes seeing the reverse, where critics will trash a movie and the audience will say, "Don't be so stuck up. We really
Yeah.
liked it." Um, I haven't seen too many of them where the critics seem to be higher on the movie than the audience was. So that made me wonder if I was being too harsh in my initial judgments of the movie. And one of the things when I wonder if I'm being too harsh is ask someone else whose opinions I respect. So let's start with what was your overall impression, quick take of the film as a whole? Thumbs up, thumbs down, strengths or weaknesses?
Yeah, I have mixed feelings about the film as a documentary. Some of its strengths, I think they picked four really remarkable young ladies to profile that are really charismatic and interesting, and have some kind of compelling biographical aspect that helps the reader or the viewer get engaged with what's going on. And I think that was good. And what I do like about the structure of the documentary is that there aren't any really formal interview set pieces. It's very observational in terms of you're out there watching the families at their cookie stands, the act of selling the cookies, or you're seeing behind the scenes the parents at home having conversations about what are their strategies. How are they going to help their
Hmm.
daughter make her sales goals and things like that? And I think it allows the audience to form their own conclusions about and to observe for themselves some of the problems with the Girl Guide's current structure for operating their cookie sales competition. So that's good. I didn't what I think where the movie fails is that you really don't get a sense of what Girl Scouts offer young girls aside from this opportunity to sell a lot of cookies and then earn prizes. And I kept asking myself, well, what do the Girl Scouts do outside of the cookie competition? There's some talk about friendship, but it's very vague, and you see images of the girls holding hands together or singing a song, and I'm like, that's nice, but I'm sure they do more than that. And you don't get any sense of the girls' other accomplishments outside of the cookie sales. So what we get when we watch the film is very much a like commercialistic view on this, you know, American institution, founded in 1912. You would think you'd get a little bit more of a historical basis or what the goals of the Girl Scouts is, and that doesn't come through in the film.
So you had mentioned in pre-show meeting that you had done some research or looking up about the Girl Scouts in Canada and were wondering if this sort of obsession with cookie sales as being the centerpiece of the Girl Scout experience was uniquely American or specifically American. Is there anything you can share about that?
Yeah, so I'm Canadian, and so when I was watching the documentary, I felt some aversion to one of the earliest lines in the documentary is one of the girls instructing a group of younger girls about upselling. And I
Mm,
was like, whoa, we're getting information about upselling before we even hear about what is the purpose of Girl Scouts. And so I was very curious to see, is this, just American or is it writ large? And so when I looked up on the Canadian Girl Guides website, it was fascinating to me to see that there's basically little to no emphasis on the cookie sales. Like
mm,
they do sell the cookies. There's a cookie selling season, but there aren't badges geared towards it. I was looking at Girl Scouts here in the US. A lot of their badges are geared towards them being these cookie entrepreneurs.
mhm,
And um, it was very interesting to see the badges in Canada are more about community service and doing things as a group and finding projects to invest in. You show your leadership skills not through sales, but through finding community programs that you add your own mark to. So things like fundraising for shelters or
mhm.
park cleanups or conservation acts. And is that a little stereotypically Canadian of being like, oh, we protect the environment and, we're so philanthropic? Maybe, but I do think it does speak to what's kind of been baked into the American ethos is not only the Protestant work ethic, but this idea that we hold up a good salesperson
Mhm.
as a natural leader, as an aspirational figure, that if you can sell things, then that must mean you are virtuous. And I do think that that's problematic. It raises a lot of questions. And for faith-based communities, that should be kind of alarming.
I wonder how much of that is American and how much of that is or could be generational. Um, Certainly my experience of I never was a Boy Scout. I was a Cub Scout and a Weeblo, which is right before in between Cub Scout. Our badges were for a variety of community service things, for projects, for skills or talents, that you showed. I know how to camp. I know how to make a fire. I know how to make a knot. I know how to, uh, not necessarily for achievements or competitions. Um, so we we meaning Americans, we do like us some winners, and so it does seem like in the one of the changes from the my growing up to culture now is the sort of um, everything has to be a competition, um, and I
Mhm.
like competition because I usually won more than I lost when I was growing up, whether it was sports or academics, but it didn't seem as though everything had to be a competition, and maybe that's naive. Um, but I was wondering if that's just the world that the girls live in. Uh, my take on the film was mixed, but particularly the thing that bothered me was honing in on the fact that the film you said allows you to see some of the dark side or some of the negative aspects of the cookie selling enterprise institutionally, structurally, how it's
Mhm.
done or accomplished. Um, Particularly in the specific incident of I did not know that the girls have to purchase the cookies up front
Yeah.
and purchase their inventory up front and then resell them with a they get to keep I think $1 out of every
Yes.
$6 that they every $6 box that they sell. So in order to make $100, I have to put out $600. I have to invest $600 uh, on the chance of getting on the chance of getting $100 back. And if I don't sell those cookies, I or my parents have to repay them. I think that's pretty dark, and I sort of
It is.
kept waiting for the film to interrogate that or raise some questions about the ethics of that, the effectiveness of that, how that impacted the pressure that put on the families. And while it mentions I felt like it wasn't really interested in as a film as interrogating that. Um, you seem to indicate that you saw that maybe as a little bit of a plus, that it didn't say, hey, look, 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 this is a negative thing, and let you decide for yourself. Uh, but I kind of felt like maybe they let the Girl Scouts off, the Girl Scout organization, not the individual Girl Scouts, off the hook a little bit too easily.
Oh, they did. They absolutely did. But I think I went back to, again, thinking about what was the purpose of the director, what were they wanting to do with this film, and it really was they're trying to celebrate these young girls and their entrepreneurial spirit, and the target audience of this is probably Girl Scout troops and their moms and the people who are involved with this. It's not necessarily people who are interested in gender studies who want to see a critical examination of American girlhood. And so I tried to check some of my critique a little bit to take that into account of but I do think there was an instance too where when I was watching the film, one of the girls, Shannon Elizabeth, is a really interesting character because she's actually one of the girls who we get to see her interests outside of Scouts. She's doing karate. You get a sense of her family. It's really beautiful. And she's also Latinx and Native American. And what was interesting in her storyline is you really did see the disparity between the kind of markets where she needs to sell her cookies versus what the other girls in the documentary are working with. They're in upper middle class families. They're selling in affluent neighborhoods and college campuses where there are people who don't sweat spending $30 on, 4 boxes of cookies. And
was Shannon Elizabeth the one that the family had to take out a mortgage or a loan against their home equity?
Yeah, they were afraid they were going to have to remortgage their
buy
house.
Enough of the cookies up front.
And what was sad is, when I thought about that situation that was so sad, is the reason that Shannon Elizabeth wanted to sell all these cookies was she just wanted to go to camp. And she'd heard all these wonderful stories about camp, and she wanted to be at camp. And her parents, and she knew she would not, if she did not sell cookies, she could not go to camp. But at the same time, the fact that her parents have to take such a financial risk to even try to get her this opportunity to go to camp, like you said, it's not just, and it's very disconcerting. And it was the one part of the documentary where I wondered, it was really looking like she wasn't going to make her sales goal, but they were going to be left with, like, I don't know, 250 or 300 boxes of cookies. And then all of a sudden there's this miraculous, mysterious giant order, and they don't tell us who ordered it or where it came from. And I was a little bit skeptical about what happened there. Was there a last minute intervention?
Producers run around to the back room and
be like, y'all are gonna buy some cookies because we can't let these people lose their home, or we can't, we want this little girl to go to camp, because the documentary ends on a high note. There is no girl who doesn't make her sales goal. In fact, all 4 girls exceed what they thought they would sell. And I kind of wish when I was watching this that maybe they gave an example of another girl who wasn't so successful. Or maybe she did do really well for herself, but she didn't make her goal. Yeah. Because I think this sets, what I would be concerned about as a parent if I was showing my daughter this documentary, is I would be worried that they'd get the perception that in order to be successful, it means that you always win, and that it's connected to commerce and your productivity. And a lot of these girls, like, they show the exhaustion, the toll it takes to sell these cookies, because it's not just a, oh, I did it once a week. Like, to make these sales numbers, they're selling all weekend. They're there after school. It's long hours, and their parents are right there with them. So there's that sacrificial component there of, like, wow, look at those hardworking people. But on the other hand, it's like, is this how our small children should be spending their time? And so, and one girl even admits, she's like, yeah, it's child labor essentially, which it is. And the documentary doesn't push back on that very much. Like, they let us see it, but they don't put teeth to it, as you said.
I'm wondering if part of the schism then in the responses was, if you're right about who their target audience is, then I'm critical of the movie for not being critical enough. But then the critics actually like it, and the target audience liked it less because they felt it was too critical, um, in terms of that division. You had said that, like, the film maybe perceives the target audience of no one in the target audience wants, a gender studies polemic on the status of American girlhood. Um, that's what I'm here for. That's what I want. So, uh, if you want,
I would like that, but
if you are the target audience that looks at Cookie Queens and just says, I have nostalgia for selling cookies, I want to remember that, have a good time, celebrate the entrepreneurial spirit, the movie may very well be for you, and this would be a good time to jump off the podcast because you may be less interested in the rest of what we have to say about it. I think a film can be very interesting to discuss whether or not one likes it. And I guess one of the questions that I struggled with, which is another reason I wanted to bring you on as female co-host for this episode, is what is the film's messaging to and about girls? Um, so, um, you want to take a stab at that one?
yeah, there's a couple different things that I thought were very interesting. First point, what I wondered about, and I think isn't helpful, is even though these girls, like Girl Scouts, is supposed to be about girls coming together, building friendships, and getting strength in community, but the way the documentary presents these girls is it's very individualistic. We don't really get to see them interact with their troop members. One of the girls, Nikki, her troop is just her and her two older sisters, which, is lovely that as a family unit they're doing this, and I'm not critiquing that. But it does change the messaging of the film when we only see these girls operating as individuals. And to some degree, I think it does undercut this idea that women need to support each other and that success could be women in a group achieving together, whereas these girls are kind of, because it's a competition, who's the most seller, they're pitted against each other just by the structure. And one of the girls, Olive, she's talking to her best friend who's in the same troop as her, and they're discussing, well, not all the girls are selling cookies. So I feel pressure to sell even more cookies because they're not earning for the troop. And I was like, this is not good, because that's already creating some internal divisions that don't need to exist with girls who are 12, right? Because I think it teaches girls that there's scarcity and that the only way to get what you want is if you are better than the other girls around you, which is girls are already comparing themselves on a myriad of levels. This isn't helpful. But the biggest thing I think that the film raises that I think is really worth us discussing is this idea of cuteness as a commodity.
Thank you.
And
I wanted to go there.
Yeah, it's an undercurrent that runs through the entire film, and we see it best in the example of Nikki, who is working in her troop with her two older sisters. And her two older sisters are teens, they're probably 14, 15, and they tell her directly, you are the hook. And you're how we sell cookies because you're cute. And we even see this play out with when the older sisters are the only ones manning the cookie stand because I guess Nikki's wandered off or something. An older gentleman comes to these girls and he's like, aren't you too old to be selling cookies? And they get this attitude about like, well, we'll buy cookies from a sweet little, 9-year-old, but we won't buy from teen girls. And it's really interesting to me that what happens in that disconnect, that we don't think 14 or 15-year-old girls can sell cookies. We don't want to buy from them, but we will buy from cute little sweet girls who are like, would you like some cookies? And you can see in the show, there's one of the youngest girl, Aura, who's 5. I mean, she's adorable. There's no question. She's just such a sweetie. And if she approached me, I would buy cookies immediately, because you don't want to crush this sweet little girl towing her heavy wagon laden with cookies. But what I was worried about is a lot of the times when they're talking to these girls about cuteness, they're putting a timeline on it, and they're telling these girls, you have this window. And it reminded me of like what women hear about childbearing years, where it's like, well, you have this biological clock, it's ticking, and You've got to capitalize on it. And it's the same with cuteness. Well, you've only got these good cute years to sell. And then after that, you're done. You can't sell anymore. Your cookie girl years are over. And I was like, well, what happens to these girls who build their identity on this idea of I'm cute, therefore I have worth. People will listen to me if I'm cute. And what does that translate into when they get older? Like, what would
Yeah,
replace that? And that's disturbing to me personally. I don't want little girls building their identity on that.
I'm glad you said it because it's a little harder for me to say as a male. Um, and I want to be careful in the way that I say it, but I wondered if the cuteness is simply pushing earlier and earlier the broader cultural messaging of if you are a woman or if you are a female, a woman being an adult female, your only commodity of any worth is your body, your physical, your physical appearance, and that does have a timeline in terms of being, being cute. There was some tension between Nikki and her sisters in terms of that cuteness, and I wonder if some of that's like, oh, you're the hook, but I wonder if some of that is internalized, like we're all 16, 15. Uh, let me take a step back. I'm thinking about like the messaging in something like the documentary Misrepresentation, that suggests that in film or television, in most media, 80 to 90% of the females that you see are between the ages of 18 and 35. And so, like, once you're over the age of 35, as far as television and the movie is concerned, you don't exist. Not just we're not interested in you, but you literally don't exist. You could, if an alien watching TV and thought that was the world or whatever, they would think that women had a lifespan of 35, or a rare few of them live beyond that. And then I wonder if the cuteness is pushing that earlier and earlier, where it's like, okay, now it's like I'm 18 or 19 or whatever, and I've already had that experience of I've grown out of or lost the only commodity, which I think goes back to what other things are the Girl Scouts supposed to be doing. I would
we
think
need that
these
balance.
organizations should be instilling confidence, instilling skills, letting you find things that you are good at, rather than being one more source of the messaging of this is the only thing you can be good at. And therefore, if you're not good at that, you're nothing. And even if you are good at that, that's got a very limited shelf life. And once your physical appearance or you age out of that is there, then I don't mean to be glib in this biblical reference, but then your salt that's lost its saltiness and good for nothing except to be,
and that's
neglected and ignored or whatever. And so on the one hand, there's this surface level of, oh, this is positive that we can celebrate these girls and their entrepreneurial spirit. And I'm down for that, or I thought I was down for that. I really am. But there's a part of me that's like, why is it that films that celebrate girls or celebrate women can only ever celebrate that one aspect of them? Can't we find additional qualities in our girls that are worth celebrating or worth building up or worth acknowledging or worth praising, as opposed to putting earlier and earlier pressure on the girls to be that one thing that we want them to be?
Yeah, I think that's where the documentary shoots itself in the foot, because by choosing the cookie competition as their frame for the whole narrative and the lens at which they look at Girl Guides, we don't see the other things that Girl Guides do. So to be charitable to Girl Guides, like on their website, they are trying to, there's badges for doing STEM activities and outdoorsman stuff and other, if you get high enough up, you can get gold awards for community service and other programs. So they're trying to help girls excel, but you don't see it in the documentary. you get a sense that, and I think, culturally, we've the stereotype of Girl Guides, they sell cookies. They've run with that to the detriment of actually thinking about, what do girls do? And I think in the documentary too, we see the pressure that these young girls feel that they exist according to someone else's gaze.
Mm.
And if it's not the general public who are buying cookies because you're such a cute little 8-year-old salesman with your sales pitch, then it's, Nikki's older sisters who are recording TikTok dances. And again, they're existing
Yep.
for someone else's gaze. And the documentary doesn't directly comment on that, but it lets us view it. And it was something that I felt disturbed by it, because I am concerned as a teacher about what the young women in my classroom, what messaging they're receiving about their own personal worth, and how much of today's youth, they are chronically online because that's the culture that's been created for them. And I was
Right.
shocked watching this documentary that the little girls were shooting, like social media promo videos to get people to buy their cookies. And I was like, surely they can sell cookies without these being like online. Like, but that's the world we're living in right now, where kids, and especially girls, are learning that they're performers.
Well, to give the documentary, to be fair, to give it credit, maybe it's not fair to say it doesn't do any of that, because after the TikTok video, was one of my favorite scenes in the movie, where Nikki wants to be in the TikTok video, and the two older sisters are like, no, and then she's in the doorway, and she's like, can I join you? And the two older sisters say no, and then you see Nikki on the stairs looking through the door while they're doing the dance. And then the very next scene is you see Nikki in the backyard, and she's just doing her own, no one's around, no one's watching, and she's just doing her own play dance. And it seems like it's the most free, it's the, it's the most happy. She's not performing for anyone, and she's not being rated like this video, not like this video or being sold. So there are moments where I think, it shows that hunger to just be authentically belonging, or whatnot, and not just all of the girls being consumed by pressure to conform. I mentioned Misrepresentation as a film that it made me think about. Were there other sort of films that dealt with similar issues, whether it be parenting or messaging about girlhood and the girl experience, particularly challenges that girls are facing, that you wanted to draw comparisons to?
I recently rewatched 2024's Girl State documentary, because although the girls in that documentary are older, they're older teens, I wanted to see if there was a similarity in terms of how they're being presented and their abilities and limitations. And it was interesting to see in that film how the girls very much, again, we get this idea that appearance very much matters for these girls, and to some degree the girls in Girl State are struggling because they're aside from normal teen insecurities about what they look like, they're actually having the institution of the Girl State organization dictating dress code to them. And it's a big topic that comes up again and again, of the double standards between, well, how are the boys treated? Are they being told that they can't walk around, the university campus hosting them shirtless? We're being told we can't show shoulders. We have to have straps that are like 3 fingers long, and we can't. And there's this, you can't go out on campus without a buddy. Even if you want to sit out on a bench right outside of your dorm, you can't be out there unless you have a buddy, because it's not safe. And it was interesting to just sort of see how, as a culture, this is something that is present, that girls are aware of, and yet we haven't really found a great way to, address these issues. And as a teacher, I teach at a school that has a dress code, and that is the constant source of, unrest and malaise from teachers trying to figure out how do we enforce dress code without having girls think that their bodies are a problem, or that they're the problem, or how do you make it fair? And I grew up in like 1990s purity culture,
Mm-hmm.
and was probably way more modest than I even needed to be, because you got to be safe just in case.
Yeah.
And I still, I still carry scars from that. And I think, so I thought Girl State was a good look again at being more observational. They do more interview. They obviously ask the girls interview questions, so it's a
And the
little
girls
less.
are a little older.
The girls are older and they have their own kind of agendas of what they're trying to advance. But it was interesting just to see how those girls view the optics, and how some of them really did struggle with, if me being my authentic self at this, forum, will that cost me an election? Can I actually
Mm-hmm.
share my political views? Can I actually be socially awkward and have it be all right? Can I get into office? What do I have to do to get into office? And it was interesting to see that the parents are removed from that documentary, so it's interesting to see what the girls are like on their own, navigating this kind of political space. Whereas in Cookie Queens, the parents are very present, and as
Mm-hmm.
they should be, because I really don't want to see 5-year-old girl out there selling cookies by herself. It's so dangerous. But
Right. I'm glad you started with Girl State in terms of the connection that's obvious. The notion that what we would today call girls being socialized,
mhm,
that so many people think like that's just their personality or that's just their culture or whatever, and neglect the role that organizations have in terms of disseminating the values of a culture, of what's appropriate, what's acceptable, what kind of behavior. And too often, I think we think about the Girl Scouts or the Girl State as being these organizations that are unequivocally good because they provide
mhm,
opportunities for girls, which they do, unquestionably. Um, but don't also think about, by having rules and restrictions, they also send messages, some of them overt, some of them less overt, about what it means to, what it means to be a girl, what sort of models you have to conform to in
mhm,
order to be successful within the confines of this organization and of the broader culture that supports and endorses the organization. I'm glad that you mentioned the the dress code. When
mhm,
I was teaching at Bible college in the late '90s, early aughts, I had like a female student who was upset one time. She said she got demerits, and I was, or whatever their demerits were, or whatever, and I was like, for what? And she was like, the three finger rule, and I was like,
mhm.
what the hell is the three
What's that?
finger rule, or whatever? And she's like, well, if you've got a shirt that's, um, covering your shoulders, the strap has to be at least three, went out with a shirt where the strap was less than 3 fingers long, or was deemed to be by, some male professor, and therefore that was considered to be it. And I was just like, that's the most ridiculous thing that I've ever heard. Um, and yet, as I've grown older and gotten away from much, much more restrictive
Mhm.
purity culture, church-based church cultures, it's not uncommon for me to run into females of roughly the same age who are like, "Oh, I've never been oppressed. I've never been held to a double standard. I can do whatever." And I'm like, "Really?" You know. Um, and what I find more and more when I talk to them is like they don't think a lot of the things that I look at and think of, that's restrictive, that's a double
Oh
standard.
yeah,
They're just like, well, that's just normal. I never,
that's how it
I
is.
never really stopped to think about like, what's the equivalent of a three-finger rule for guys?
There
Um,
isn't one
like,
probably.
how much of your butt crack can be showing in your low rider jeans, or something like that. Um, eh, that's just the air that they breathe and the
Yeah,
water that they swim in. And the earlier you start breathing it and start swimming in it,
the
the
more
less you
normal it
become
is.
aware of it, and the more you just think of this is not crazy, this is not oppressive, this is not stupid, this is just the way things are. Um, and so I do think that both Girls State, I think Girls State is a good call in terms of dealing with one of the same questions, which is at a different age level, there
Yeah.
are ways in which institutions provide opportunities, and that's a good thing. I speak of as
Yeah.
someone coming to education, but any opportunity comes with restrictions, guidelines that are set
Mhm.
by the organization, and those guidelines are super powerful about sending the message of, you know, what you need to, not just what you need to do to be successful, but what you need to be in order to be successful. You need to mold yourself into this kind of person, whether it's cute, whether it's
Yeah.
compliant, whether um, when I was talking about um, Cookie Queens with my wife, uh, she had mentioned a whole lot the word nice and how much emphasis
Hmm.
there was about being nice, um, being a nice girl.
Yeah.
And I don't think there's anything wrong with being polite. I don't
No.
think there's anything wrong with being nice. But I do think it is telling how gendered that adjective is and how dominant it is in the messaging to girls of that age versus boys of that age, boys of
Yeah.
that age.
Well, one of the girls in Girls State, Nisha, who wanted to be on the Supreme Court
Yep.
panel, she talked about how exhausting it is that she's like, girls are constantly observing those around them, and
Mhm.
they're also taking in, am I doing enough? And she said it's that active comparison when you look at someone else who's doing better, quote unquote, better than you think, well, what's wrong with me? It must be because I'm not doing enough. I need to
Mm.
be more. And she's like, and it's exhausting. And when she said that, it hit core home for me because I think often enough when I come up short in something, I think, oh, it's my fault. I wasn't enough. And I think girls are very much conditioned to think that it's not the structures around them that are problematic, it's them. And if they could just be more, work harder, be nicer, try to be prettier, put in more effort, then it would be fine. And I think what is cool about the Girls State documentary is it's the very fact that they decided to hold the boys state and the
Hmm.
girls' state programs on this Missouri University campus that allowed the girls to actually start asking these questions of, wait a minute, what the guys aren't being told that they have to have a buddy system. The
Hmm.
boys aren't chided for having their shirts off while they walk around campus. They're getting to
Hmm.
talk about real political issues far quicker than we are. We have to learn a song with hand actions, which, may or may not be fun to do, depending on your viewpoint on kind of camp games. But they
Hmm.
were able to sort of put a magnifying glass to it and realize, oh, we're getting a very different experience. And our program is vastly underfunded compared to that of the boys. And
Yeah.
it's interesting when you look at that, you realize that there is sort of this built-in set of assumptions that boys are going to be political animals, not girls. That girls, there'll be some women that are the exception who enter bodies of government, but that we want to really put money into having boys be these civically active figures. And
Mm.
that's harmful because I think one of the, great aspects of America is this idea that everyone could be an active citizen, that you could have this equal opportunity under the
Right.
law, and if a woman is capable and caring and wants to be engaged with her community and serve through politics, she should be allowed to do that. Yet we create these kind of barriers even in the very programs that are designed to hopefully create future
Hmm.
politicians of America who so it was pretty telling to see that. And it hits home for my own experiences of wanting to do what the boys get to do
Hmm.
and being like, why am I doing this girl program where they
Right.
said I could crochet, and that's no shade against that, but I would like to be doing archery right now.
So, one of the things you said that my kind of final comment, bringing it back to Cookie Queens about the pressure to do more, that was expressed in Girls State. Um, Not exactly the same language, but I saw it a lot in Olive in
Yes.
Cookie Queens. Um, and let me be clear, Olive is a star. I mean, in every sense of the word. She's precocious. She's accomplished. She excels. She's a record breaker in terms of how much. I don't want to take, and I am not taking away anything from what she's done or who she is. She's remarkable as a young girl. Um, that being said, as an adult, there were places in the movie where I felt genuine concern for her and
Mm-hmm.
for her mental health, where it was like she held the record for the most 8,000 boxes of cookies,
Yeah.
and was like, well, maybe I only want to sell 5,000 this year, 4,000. And her mom's like, do you think you could ever sell 8,000 again? And then she makes her goal. And then it's like, well, you can have a stretch goal now that you've made your goal. Maybe if you will add a little bit more. And there was that sense where I could feel her already at a younger age struggling with that realization of what I call the Ecclesiastes realization of like, um, is this it? Is there,
Mm-hmm.
I've worked so hard to reach this goal and I've made the goal, and why do I feel so empty? Why doesn't the exhilaration of making my goal carry me forward instead of it's just like, that's never enough. If I was able to make the goal, then obviously the goal was too low and I need to raise the goal and push
Yeah.
myself to keep going further and further. And there's never a sense of like, I'm enough whether or not I make my goal or not, or
Mm-hmm.
I am proud of what I achieved enough that I can put my shovel down and rest, or my cookie box and rest.
Yeah.
Um, I don't know. I kept playing that song from the Jenny Lynn song from The Greatest Showman,
Yeah.
"Never Enough," through my head, which is my anthem whenever I see an Ecclesiastes film or uh,
Mm-hmm.
feel that in my own life of like, you can get all the shine of 1,000 spotlights, all the gold or whatever, and it just never seems to be enough. And that's not a gender thing either or whatever. I
No.
mean, I think a lot of guys can relate to that. A lot of men should be able to relate to that. I think the male equivalent of that um, is the famous American football coach Bill Parcells, when was asked why he retired from coaching football, and he said because the losing hurt more than the winning felt good. It was
Mm.
just not a zero-sum game. It wasn't like, oh, the success justifies all of this hard work. It was just, when I failed, I felt miserable. And
Mm.
when I succeeded, it was like, okay, so how are you going to top that? And I felt like I already saw Olive falling into that,
Yeah.
a little bit. And I wanted to reach through the screen and, either slap her mother, metaphorically, not literally,
Of course.
or just give her a big hug and say, it's okay if you never sell another cookie in your entire life.
Exactly.
You should be rightfully proud of what you've accomplished. So that was my final comment on the movie. Do you have any sort of concluding
Well,
thoughts that
I
you
think
wanted
just
to add?
building on that with Olive, I think one of the most touching scenes in the film is when Olive expresses her thing of, well, I don't know what my identity in the troop is, aside from being the cookie seller.
Mm,
And that's what I bring to the group. And her best friend looks at her really sad and like
mm,
hugs her and says, "No, you're my best friend and you're kind and you're a good public speaker and you work really hard and you have all these attributes. You're not just the cookie seller." And I'm glad that they captured
mm-hmm.
that moment. And I felt sad that we didn't get more scenes of adults saying that to her, because I think this is, what it comes back to with kids is we want to teach kids to make goals, but we also need to teach them to have boundaries and to be okay with saying, you know what, you're actually really physically exhausted.
Yeah.
I know you want to do more, but you can't do more. You're going to rest. And you may be frustrated or upset with that at first, but you need it. And it's I think when kids don't learn that, then they have real problems as adults where again, it'll
Yeah.
never be enough. You'll
Yeah.
work until you die. And I think with Cookie Queens, I like that it could be a springboard for these conversations. That
Mm,
something, seeming innocuous as selling Girl Scout cookies we could have these conversations about what are we telling little girls to do? What are we saying their worth is? And, do we really want, like, is it worth the price
yeah.
of what these kids are being asked to pay? And hopefully the organization will change their policies and allow these girls and the local troops to have more profit from all their hard
Hmm.
work. But I appreciated this window into this world that I arguably didn't know a lot about, and it kind of leave on an antidote of I bought some cookies this last cookie
Oh,
drive
really?
outside my local
Okay.
Safeway, and I made a point when I saw those girls to talk to them about their badges. And I was like, hey, what badge are you most proud of? And what do you enjoy doing with your troop? And the girls looked genuinely confused that I was asking them that question. And the
Mm,
troop mom who was there was like, oh, no one ever asked us that.
mm,
And I just hope as a culture, I'm not trying to like put myself as being,
right.
oh, I'm so virtuous. I care about the children's souls. But I really hope as a culture we can move more in that direction of like talk to these girls about who they are and what they do that they're proud of, and not just view them as little salespeople who are then going to be inserted into the cog of whatever corporation or kind of capitalist endeavor we've deemed,
Mm.
the flavor of the month when they're adults.
So, Priska, thank you so much for your insights into Cookie Queens. Thank you, everyone, for listening. If you have questions or comments about this episode, feel free to leave us a comment at the Substack. Um, my Substack address is kenmorefield@gmail.com. And you can leave questions or comments for either of us, or if you have a suggestion for a film you'd like to hear Priska and I discuss, feel free to let us know. Thank you, everyone, for listening.